Vijay has grown up attending camps and retreats and now spends his time volunteering as a counselor and as a teacher. Currently, Vijay lives in suburban Michigan with his wife and daughter and is a pathologist. And during his free time, Vijay spends a lot of time working on retreats and workshops and many sick-related topics. Today, Vijay is going to take us on a journey, really focusing on Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale's life, using his own words, just kind of seeing what his role truly was during the 1984 massacre of Sikhs.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So any discussion about 1984, what happened with the Sikhs, you really have to include Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale in that discussion. And I think it's important to really explore what he was about, where did he come from, what do we know about him, and because there's been so much that's been said about him, that's been published about him, and sometimes it's kind of hard to differentiate what's true and what's not. Really separating fact from fiction is really a difficult thing to do with a lot of our history and even contemporary history in a lot of ways. So we'll look at some of the myths, the legends, and try to discern some truth from that, and hopefully walk away with a better understanding of what Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale was all about. So, well, where did he come from? Let's start at the beginning. So he was born in 1947, which coincidentally is the same year that India gained its independence from the British. And he was born in the village of Rote, which is today it's located in the Moga district, shown in yellow there. It used to be part of the Faridkot district there. As legend would have it, that he actually, by the age of 5, that he actually knew his entire nickname by heart. Whether we can confirm that or not, who knows, but it's definitely inspiring to know that children, even in contemporary history, lived lives at a very young age that was completely engrossed in Bhai. And he did take Kanekbal at the age of 5, and he basically was under the tutelage of Bhai Gurmat Singh Khalsa, who was the Jathedar of the Damdami Taksal at that time. His father knew Bhai Gurmat Singh, and Gurmat Singh had actually come and said, Bhinderwale was one of 8 children, and Bhai Gurmat Singh had actually said, you should give one of your children up to the Taksal, and so that ended up being Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale. And so he spent some time with Jarnail Singh spent time with Bhai Gurmat Singh in the village of Bhinderwale, and later Bhai Jarnail Singh would also spend more time there in the village of Bhinderwale, and that's actually where he gets the name Bhinderwale. So he wasn't actually born in that village, but as a child and then later on after becoming Jathedar, he would spend time there, and so he became known as Bhinderwale at that time. And so was Bhai Gurmat Singh before him, and Bhai Gurmat Singh also had those titles. In 1965, he officially enrolled in the Damdami Taksal. He was about 17 years old, or 18 years old at that time. And he just spent 1 year with the Damdami Taksal, and then he came back to his family's farm, worked there, and he ended up getting married, had 2 kids. Then in 1977, Bhai Gurmat Singh, who was the Jathedar of the Damdami Taksal, he passed away in a car accident, after a car accident, and he named Bhai Jarnail Singh to be the next Jathedar of the Damdami Taksal. Now between 1977, when he became Jathedar of the Taksal, in 1982, he would go through villages throughout Punjab, and he would tour, and basically he would administer Amrit to the local Sikh Sandhits, and it said that he actually gave Amrit to tens of thousands of Sikhs, and he did Sikhi Prachar, he taught people about Gurbani, about the Guru's message, and he encouraged Sikhs at that time to basically give up things like alcohol, the drugs, the pornography, which had actually become very rampant throughout Punjab. the 60s and 70s. Khushwant Singh would go on later to write about Bhinderwale, that Bhinderwale's Amrit Prachar was a resounding success. Adults in the thousands took oaths in public to abjure liquor, tobacco, and drugs, and were baptized. Video cassettes showing blue films and cinema houses lost out to the village Gurdwara. Men not only saved money they had earlier squandered in self-indulgence, but now worked longer hours on their lands and raised better crops. They had much to be grateful for to Jarnail Singh, who came to be revered by them. Now it should be known that Khushwant Singh was actually not a big fan of Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, so it's interesting that he wrote these things about him because in the late 70s, this is what Bhinderwale was doing. So what was his mission? So according to his own words, and I do want to mention here that I've taken these quotes, these translations up from his speeches, from a translation of all his speeches that were done by Dr. Rabir Singh Sandhu. And in this book, Struggle for Justice, this is where I'm getting the translations for all of his speeches. So he said in February of 1984, my mission is to administer Amrit, to explain the meanings of Gurbani, and to teach Gurbani to those around me. And his mission hadn't changed from his rise to popularity up until the attack on Darbar Sahib in 84. He goes on to say, I've been living here in Guru Nanak Nivas since July 1982. I am here to stop the atrocities committed against Singhs through peaceful protest. There is no other purpose. So he was specifically asked in an interview, what is your mission? What are you doing here? And this was his response, to stop the atrocities committed against Singhs through peaceful protest. And this was what he always maintained throughout his speeches. My business is to administer Amrit, my business is doing the Katha, my business is that a Hindu should be firm in his faith. And he later goes on in that conversation to say, and that a Sikh should be firm in theirs. And so again, this was March 8th, 1984, just a couple of months prior to the attack on Darbar Sahib. And we see that he hasn't changed his attitude towards what his mission was from the very beginning in his rise to popularity when he became Jathedar, Damani Taksal, up until the very end. His mission was always Sikh oriented and Gurmat oriented. So long as the government does not accept the Anandpur Sahib resolution in a straightforward manner, we should keep going. So again, this kind of also explains what was his mission, what were his goals. I'm not going to talk about the Anandpur Sahib resolution because Kuldeepam was going to talk about that later, but that was a major part of what his goal was, and also I'll talk about how that played in with the Akali Dal. But this was part of his mission up until the very end, that the government of India needed to accept the Anandpur Sahib resolution. So in separating fact from fiction, as I mentioned, there have been many, many claims made about Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale. There was tons of propaganda at the time he was alive, let alone after he became Shaheed. And it was very, very difficult for people to really understand what he was about, what was he doing, why was he there. Many people have speculated about what his intentions were. And again, I just want to make the point that a lot of the claims that we hear today about Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, his life, his intentions, his actions, a lot of the claims were actually made at that time while he was alive. And he did his best to address those claims to the summit, and we'll explore that. So a lot of what I'm going to do today is going to be to talk about what were his own words and how did that play into what was going on around him, and how does that affect our view of him. So the first claim that I want to talk about is going to be that Bhinderwale was a puppet of the Congress Party. So in the 1980s, the early 80s, while he was alive, there were many, many rumors saying that Bhai Jarnail Singh was a puppet he was a Congressite, they called him. People were calling him a Congressite, and that he worked for the Congress government, which was basically the political party Indira Gandhi belonged to. So it's important to look at, well, where did these rumors originate? I'm not going to talk about Indira Gandhi. There's a lot to be said about her, but we don't have time for it. But basically just understand that she was Prime Minister from 1966 to 77, and then again in 1980 to 84. And if any of you viewed the video, that was supposed to be prerequisite viewing material before you came to the retreat, you would understand a little bit about Indira Gandhi's past and what was going on with her. So I'm not going to talk about her, but I do want to talk about another member, in quotes, of the Congress Party, which was her younger son, Sanjay Gandhi. And I just want to give his background a little bit. He was basically a failed auto engineer. He had a high school education, and he had done an internship abroad, from which he actually dropped out with Rolls-Royce. He dropped out, came back to India, and he was at that time, because Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister, he was given the sole contract to develop an automobile for the Indian people that could be affordable, that was going to be efficient and everything. He really had no experience whatsoever. He didn't deserve the contract, but it was given to him. He was provided land by the government to do this with. And basically, it was a huge disaster. In 5 years, he hadn't produced a single automobile, and the company ended up getting sold to Suzuki. But after his company failed in 75, he decided that he was going to become more involved in politics. And between 75 and 77, he was actually known to be an extra constitutional authority because he became his mother's unofficial advisor. He was often involved in decisions that were made by Indira Gandhi and other parliament members. And so, one of the things, just to give you an idea of the character of Sanjay Gandhi, he had gone to the Turkmen Gate in Delhi at the Jama Masjid, which is supposed to be a very beautiful masjid that's there. And he actually complained that he couldn't see it because there were so many slums and shanty towns blocking his view. And so he got the idea in his head that they had to clean up these slums. And basically what they did, and he did it under the title of beautification of Delhi and other urban areas. He basically came in with bulldozers, and they got rid of all these slums by just bulldozing them, literally bulldozing them. They displaced about 70,000 people in doing this, and about 150 people were killed in demonstrations. But in the end, in his mind, Delhi was made more beautiful. So this is the kind of character of guy we're talking about. In 1976, he had the idea that the population was growing too quickly in India, so they implemented a forced sterilization act that basically forced people, especially in villages, the poor, to undergo vasectomies so that they couldn't reproduce. And this was obviously met with a lot of resentment, and people didn't like it. And again, it was not something that worked out very well in his favor, but he was the impetus behind doing that. And again, at this point, he holds no political position whatsoever. He's just the son of the Prime Minister. In 1980, for the first time, he holds a position, which was he was elected to Parliament, and then in 1980, he actually died. He was doing some aerial acrobatics. He was a pilot, and he crashed his plane and died. And it's said that during his time with Indira Gandhi, he also was a key player in manipulating the financial sector to help some of the banks prosper. The other member of the Congress Party that I want to talk about is Gandhi Zal Singh, an important player in all of this. He was someone, he actually had a background from the Sikh Missionary College in Amritsar. That's where he got the title Gandhi. He actually did Sikhi Prachar before getting into politics. He had a lot of flair. He spoke well. People really respected him, and they actually listened to him. Once he started getting into politics in 1949, he had various positions. Basically, in 1972 to 77, he held the position of Chief Minister of Punjab. And during that time, he actually did quite a bit. This is a map of called Gurmat Singh Marg. Basically, he built a highway that went from Anandpur Sahib at the top right there, all the way to Talwandi Sahib, which is where Gangama Sahib is. And basically, he developed this highway. Along the way, he set up historical sites, important places that the Gurus had been and visited. He actually reclaimed a lot of artifacts of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's and from other prominent Sikhs from the British. He was able to bring those back into Punjab. And he gave a lot of grants to Gurdwaras. He named towns after under the Sahibzade. So Sikhs started to like him, and he actually did a lot at that time, it seemed, to try to build up the to build up Sikh pride and try to get the trust of the Punjabi people of the Sikhs. So one thing he wanted to do, though, the Congress Party was at odds with the Akali Dal, and so the Akali Dal, again, Jarnail Singh wanted to undermine the power of the Akali Dal, which was a major political party in Punjab of the Sikhs, represented by the Sikhs. And so one way in which he did that, Sanjay Gandhi had the idea that we need to build up a prominent person in the Sikh who we can use to undermine the Akali Dal. Jarnail Singh supposedly provided 2 names to Sanjay Gandhi, and one of those names was Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale. And Sanjay Gandhi saw him, his personality, his flair, the way he spoke to people, how people respond to him. And it said that Sanjay Gandhi actually selected Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale to be the person that they would try to gain his trust. And basically they did that by pointing out all the faults of the Akali Dal. The Akali Dal had done nothing, and people felt that way. They felt that the party had done nothing for them. And basically we had Jarnail Singh, who was doing all this stuff for Gurdwaras, giving them grants, trying to restore Sikh history and everything. And by Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, it seems that he decided that this would be a good idea to put some trust in the Jarnail Singh at that time. So we're talking about in the late 1970s. And basically, he was given a platform upon which to speak, because they would have political rallies for the Congress Party. And by Jarnail Singh would sometimes speak at those, not necessarily speaking about the politicians, but able to do his prachar on those platforms. And it's even said that he shared a platform with Indira Gandhi a few times as well. But there's no evidence that I could find or anything concrete to say that Indira Gandhi and Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale were close. Someone before this session just told me that they had heard an article was written where it was said that Jarnail Singh was like a son to Indira Gandhi. That is absolutely false. There's no historical basis to say that, and certainly not anything that Bhai Jarnail Singh did or said to say that he was that close to Indira Gandhi. But he did support the Congress Party in the late 70s. So Bhai Jarnail Singh says later on, because in about 1980 or so, he starts to realize that he doesn't really, these politicians aren't really looking out for the interests of Sikhs. His main mission was to do Sikhi Prachar, to get Sikhs to take Amrit, to improve the condition of the Sikhs in Punjab. And he starts to realize in about 1980 that, I don't really need these people, they don't really need me, our goals are not in alignment. And basically he starts to distance himself from Jarnail Singh. Now the Akalis around this time are starting to gain more popularity. They're trying to hold on to their power in Punjab. And they start saying that Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale is a Congressite, that he's in line with the Congress, and that he supports the Congress government, and that he shouldn't be trusted. And basically this was his response to them. He says, some friends have started to say that Bhinderwale speaks for the Congress. These people have only one aim in saying this, that is to somehow get those who are sitting here to start fighting amongst themselves. So he denied ever being a Congressite. So he denied ever showing support for the Congress Party, even though at one time they had a common goal and he was given a platform to speak with them. But he would always maintain that he was never a Congressite or a supporter of the Congress Party. And this was said in April 1st, 1984, just a few months before the attack. So he talks a little bit about Jarnail Singh here, and what he says to him, and I'd like to read the whole quote from this. It's a little bit longer than what'll fade on the screen. But he says, the man who getting under Indira's sandals, sitting on a chair, refuses to accept Sikh appearance and has considered the chair to be preferable. And he's talking about Jarnail Singh here. You must be aware of whose face is blackened. Kasaji, the face of a person is blackened if he has committed some great sin, of one who has dishonored a daughter or a sister. Such a man's face is blackened. He he is made to ride a donkey through the village in a procession, that this man who has committed such a sin, the person who with his own hands colors his beard and sits on a chair, so he's saying coloring his beard is holding a government position. He always said sitting on a chair. And sits on a chair, what right does he have to speak about the Sikh nation, of saying that the Sikhs are not a separate nation? And then he goes on to say the face of a sinner is blackened. So he actually likened Jarnail Singh to being a sinner and used the analogy that he colors his own beard, he's blackening his own face. So I think through his words, at least what he said, he never suggested that he was in line with Jarnail Singh going into the early 80s. He certainly distanced himself and said that we don't have common goals. He would go on to say, some people say that Bhinderwale has fallen into so-and-so's lap, and that so-and-so has bought Bhinderwale. It is true that I have been bought and fallen into a lap. I fell into the lap of the Bhai when I received Amrit. So again, he always maintained, going into March 1984, it was always Sikhi Prajar that he wanted to do. He never had political aspirations of his own as far as holding a title or a position, even though a lot of what he did was very political in its nature. In February 1984, if any Sikh in India has seen me even take a sip of plain water at the oral of any Congress MLA is a position in the Legislative Assembly, any Agali MLA or any comrade MLA, meaning communist, stand up and say so, I shall accept any punishment. So he challenged the Sangha. He said, if you can provide proof that this is what I'm doing and that I'm in cahoots with the Congress Party, please do so and I will accept punishment. But this is what the propaganda that was being spread by the news media at the time. It was everywhere. And he did his best to fight it, but what proof could he give other than to constantly deny it? If I'm a government agent or a Congressite, I ask you, why have you got me standing here? Like, why is the Sangha invited me to speak? Why don't you hold me by the ear and throw me out? You've decided that you have to decide this. Let me say this to you, Khalsaji. I am not your son, nor am I your leader. I am only your servant, a lowly watchman for the Guru's congregation. If you feel I am a Congressite or a government agent, I shall quietly go out of here, regardless of whether when I'm outside that I live or die. So he's even saying, throw me out of here, if I live or die, fine. But show me that I'm a Congressite, show me that I'm supporting Indira Gandhi in her politics. Tell me if administering Amrit, teaching people to live by the Dad, teaching them to read the Guru's word, getting them to unite under the Nishan Sahib, uniting them with Sri Guru Granth Sahib, uniting them with Akal Takht Sahib and Harmandir Sahib, to be desirous of demanding and urging the young men to demand justice for the lost honor of our daughters and sisters, for the blood of innocents, and for the insults against the Satguru, in declaring support for the Band. Not surreptitiously, but openly. If all this is the work of an agent of Congress, then what is the business of others? So he's basically saying, these are the things that I do, but you're calling me a Congressite, somebody who supports Congress, then, what's someone who actually does bad things? So I think looking at what he said, kind of following the history through there, which he certainly denied any connection to the government of India, especially from 1980 onwards. It's important to note that he really didn't have any ties to the Congress Party at that point. And in my opinion, you can take his words at face value based on his actions, based on what he can maintain over the next 2 years. And in my opinion, this claim that Bhinderwale was a puppet of Congress is a false claim. So the next claim that I want to go into is that Bhinderwale was against Harchand Singh Longowal. So Harchand Singh Longowal, who was he? Well, he was someone who had studied Gurbani Kirtan under the guidance of Bhai Jodh Singh. He was a Granthi and a Gurdwara president in the village of Longowal. And that's where he got his name, Longowal, when he was in his early 20s. And then he joined the Akali Dal in 1965. And in 75 to 77, when the emergency was declared in India, a lot of the leaders of the Akali Dal were actually in prison. And the responsibility to lead the Akali Dal in protest actually fell on his shoulders. And he did that. And then in 1980, he was formally elected the president of the Akali Dal. And after 1980, there were multiple marches, acts of disobedience, civil disobedience against the grievances of Punjab. And one of those things was actually to establish the Anandpur Sahib resolution. In July 1982, he actually invited Bhai Jarnail Singh to come live at the Barsad in Guru Nanak Nivas, which are the hostels located there. And he called Bhai Jarnail Singh, he called him our stave, which is stick, our stave to beat the government. So he actually saw value in Bhai Jarnail Singh, who was also speaking for the Sikhs and saying we need to demand our rights. In 1982, August 1982, he launched the Dharmyod Morcha. The Akali Dal launched the Dharmyod Morcha, which Bhai Jarnail Singh also joined in with. They launched it together. And in June 2nd of 1984, the day before the attack on Darbar Sahib, before the army started to move in, which was on June 3rd. So on June 2nd, he actually announced that Punjabis would refuse to pay land revenues, water bills, and electricity bills, and block the flow of grain outside of Punjab. So just kind of a side note there, kind of giving you insight into what his goals were. If we look at what Bhai Jarnail Singh said about Longowal, it's important to note the papers, the media was again trying to put them at odds with one another. The media was printing stories saying that Bhinderwale and Longowal are fighting, that you got to pick a side. There's one side or the other, and they're fighting. Bhinderwale maintained till the very end that he had no animosity towards Longowal. In October of 1983, he said, "Do not pay attention to the news that Longowal and Bhinderwale have fallen out. There's some dear fellow named Jatinder Singh. He reported that Bhinderwale and Longowal outwardly are on speaking terms, but not from the inside. There's no beard on his face. He drinks heavily. He has no knowledge of Bani. Does he have a gauge to know what is inside our minds? Such unfounded and false propaganda." So he did his best to fight this propaganda for several years that Longowal and Bhinderwale were fighting and that they weren't getting along. It is over 18 months since the start of the Morcha. Let anyone Sikh among you stand up and challenge me. You have the right to. I have been your watchdog. I am not your son nor your leader. I am just your dog, a dog of the Guru's congregation. Let any one of you get up and tell me if in these 18 months, from the lowest watchman all the way up to the dictator, he called Longowal the dictator, not as an insult, but just that he was the leader of the Akali Dal. And he also often called him Satji. You have read in the newspapers or heard from my tongue any remarks against any of them. He never made personal attacks against Longowal or anyone else in the Akali Dal party. In April of 1984, one of Bhinderwale's close confidants, his companion, was killed in an assassination attempt that was supposed to take out Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale and 3 of his companions. And it was undertaken by Surinder Singh Chinda, who was a drug dealer who had been arrested and had been released from jail, and this was the first thing he did upon being released from jail, and Baljit Kaur, who was his girlfriend. They basically lured Surinder Singh Sodhi into a hotel, and she shot him in the head. Baljit Kaur shot him in the head, and then Surinder Singh Chinda shot him 5 or 6 times in the chest. And they were also supposed to go on to kill Bhai Jarnail Singh as well. But what ended up happening was that Baljit Kaur basically got caught by Bhinderwale's men, and she confesses to doing it. And she also implicates Gurmat Singh, who is the secretary of the Akali Dal. This is not Gurmat Singh Dora, this is the secretary of the Akali Dal. She says he's the one that put them up to it to kill Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale and a few of his men. What ends up happening is that the murderers, everyone had a feeling that they would end up dying, the murderers, and there were signs put up that said that they would be killed within 24 hours. Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale made a public announcement that no harm should come to Baljit Kaur because she had confessed to what she had done and she had told them who put her up to it. But despite his remarks, she was also killed. The body was found within 24 hours as well. But this is one of the events, the killing of Surinder Singh Sodhi. This is one of the things that deeply affected Bhai Jarnail Singh. Even though we're talking about kind of getting early into '84, this is something that had a real impact on him. And really, after that, we see him starting to say more and more things about the Akali Dal, just in the sense that, say, calling them liars and saying they're lying about who he is. He says in May of 1984, this was his very last speech that he gave before becoming Shaheed. Even after Surinder Singh Sodhi had been murdered, he says, if until today I have made any statements to any newspaper against the Shromani Akali Dal, I shall accept any punishment that you award me. So even after all of that, right before the June attack, he basically said, knowing that someone in the Akali Dal had hired a hit on him, he even says this, saying that I've never made any public announcements openly against them, and you shouldn't accept any propaganda against that. So I would say that he was not against Harchand Singh Longowal or the Akali Dal. He may have had issues with certain people, but basically they were calling him liars. They were calling him a liar for several months at this point, and he was basically just trying to say that that those people are the liars, not a Congressite or anything like that. So he was not openly against Harchand Singh Longowal, so I'd say that this claim is false, in my opinion. The next claim is pretty easy to talk about. It comes up, it's totally baseless, but it comes up. Bhinderwale was a member of the Babbar Khalsa. Babbar Khalsa was started by Sukhdev Singh Babbar, and Dalwinder Singh Parmar became the head of the international wing, so Babbar Khalsa International. And basically Babbar Khalsa was started after the 1978 massacre during the incident with the Nirakaris. So this is where the Babbar Khalsa formed. After that, Bhai Jarnail Singh never had any affiliation, never claimed any affiliation. They never claimed that he was a part of their group. But basically, he knew who they were. He knew Sukhdev Singh and knew Dalwinder Singh. And he even in a few of his speeches, he speaks about them respectfully. He never condemns them or says anything bad about them. But actually, Sukhdev Singh actually told an India Today reporter, he openly said that he had nothing to do with Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, and he actually even called Bhinderwale a coward. So from Sukhdev Singh's side, they didn't have much to do with Bhinderwale, and they didn't like him very much. But Bhai Jarnail Singh never openly spoke against them, and he was never a part of their group. In fact, the Babbar Khalsa came in 1983 in December. 5 members of the Babbar Khalsa came into Guru Nanak Niwas, where Bhinderwale and his men were staying, and they basically at gunpoint told them that they had to leave Guru Nanak Niwas. And at that point, Bhinderwale says in his speeches that we decided to peacefully leave Guru Nanak Niwas. They asked us to get out, we decided to leave, and it was after that, on December 15, 1983, that they actually entered the Akal Takht. So this is 7 months before the attack on the Barsa complex. And it was also widely believed that the Babbar Khalsa were told by Harchand Singh Longowal, president of Akali Dal, to do this, to get Bhinderwale and his men out of Guru Nanak Niwas. So I think we can clearly say that Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale was not a member of the Babbar Khalsa. So maybe he wasn't a member of the Babbar Khalsa, but another claim has been that he was a separatist who demanded Khalistan, and this definitely deserves some attention. This is in May of 1983, so we're talking about over a year before the attack on Mohanpal complex. How can a nation which has sacrificed so much for the freedom of the country want it fragmented? But I shall definitely say that we are not in favor of Khalistan, nor are we against it. Brothers, I don't suppose it, nor do I support it. I don't oppose it, nor do I support it. We are silent. However, one thing is definite. If this time the Queen of India does give it to us, we shall certainly take it. So he never said we want Khalistan, we want to be separate from India. What he always said was that if they offer it to us, we're not going to oppose it. They made a mistake in 1947 by not asking for it. We're not asking for it now, but if you offer it to us, we will take it. It is Indra's business. Indra should tell us whether she wants to keep us in Hindustan or not. I have not opposed Khalistan, nor have I supported it so far. Yes, I have neither opposed it nor supported it. We have to live in the country. Those who tell us to get out of the country are grossly mistaken. So you can see, through his words, he never said we want to be a separate country, we want to be a separate nation. He never said we're demanding Khalistan. He never once asked for it. Up until his shaheed, he never once asked for Khalistan, but he did say that if it was offered to the Sikhs, that they wouldn't make the same mistakes of the past. So was he a separatist demanding Khalistan? In my opinion, based on what we know about him, what he said, this is a false claim. This is a myth. There's no account of him ever asking for Khalistan, at least not publicly. The next claim was that Bhinderwale was against Hindus and threatened them. This was widely circulated amongst the media again. Lots and lots of propaganda at the time. Indira Gandhi promoted this as well in her speeches, saying that Bhinderwale was a separatist and he didn't like Hindus, didn't want to live with Hindus, this and that. And so perhaps one of the most controversial statements that Bhajan Singh Bhinderwale had made was this year. Because Indira Gandhi had said that the Sikhs in India should think about, or the Sikhs in Punjab should think about the Sikhs who are outside of Punjab. And it was basically a threat. And he says the Prime Minister of India says that the Sikhs of Punjab should think about what might happen to the Sikhs living in other states. This is a threat. She is the Prime Minister. If Bhinderwale stood up on the stage and said, Bibi, if this is what you think, and this is your attitude towards the turban and the beard, we also have counted that there are only 20 of them to each one of us, meaning only 20 Hindus to each Sikh. A case is registered under Clause 506. So he's saying if he responds to a threat, a case is registered against him. But if the Prime Minister of India makes a threat against Sikhs in India, nothing happens. And he always said that she was the daughter of Brahmins, and so she was able to get away with all this, saying stuff like that. December 31st, if in Rajasthan those of the Hindu Janasangh say in the form of an ultimatum that by the 25th of December all Rajasthani Sikhs should pick up their pachatas and towels and head out of Rajasthan, get out of Rajasthan, no case is registered. However, if in that context Bhinderwale says, all right, if you wish to drive the Sikhs out of there, the Hindus of Punjab should be prepared for the next world, and there is an uproar in Parliament for 3 days. Again, he's not the one who came out and said, I want to hurt Hindus or anything like that. He was responding to a public threat that had made against Sikhs by government agents, by the government. In early 1982, we see how respectful he actually was towards a lot of Hindus and Hindus who should practice their religion. Who was Jarnail? Wasn't he a Hindu from amongst you? He was a Brahmin. Jarnail is sitting here in Gurmat. If a son of a Sikh has made obeisance here, he has done so at the feet of Jarnail, the Brahmin. Answering his critics who depicted him as hating Hindus, he said in September of 1983, I have no enmity with the Hindus as such. If I were their enemy, why would I rescue the daughter of a Hindu from Jalalabad? And he's referring to an incident where a Hindu came to him and said, my daughter has been kidnapped. Can you please help me? And he did. He sent his men to go retrieve the man's daughter and return her safely to him. The man's name was Hukum Chand. And there were actually many incidents of this. Bhinderwale helping out local Hindus. He provided 5,000 rupees to families of martyred Hindu activists in Punjab. He gave money to local shopkeepers. Just one incident whose store had burned down and had come to him for help. And so he definitely helped people when he could, when they came to him, and he didn't discriminate between Sikhs and Hindus when it came to that. In his very last speech, in May 24th, 1984, just a week before the attack, today there was a statement made by Indira that she will act with firmness. My reaction was that that is all very well. Don't be the first to hurt anyone. We do not have any personal enmity against the Hindus, but if the government and the Hindu rulers make it their goal that the religious temple has to be destroyed and the Sikhs have to be finished off, then there is no need for unity. So he's basically saying, stand up for your rights, stand up for what you believe in, and we have to fight our fight. Nobody's going to fight it for us. So was Bhinderwale against Hindus? In my opinion, using his words, what he said and what he did, I would have to say that this claim is false. Now, did Bhinderwale took the law into his own hands? Well, let's look at that claim. Before we can comment on that, we have to look at the political and social events of what was going on, the atmosphere of what was there. We already know a little bit about that. We know there was the Nirangari account attack in 1978 where 13 Sikhs became shaheed. And basically the Nirangaris got off scot-free. Bachchan he got off scot-free and he wasn't held accountable for that. And this event seems to have sparked a lot of his political activism. This was the first event that really got him out in the open, talking more politically about Sikh rights. And it really deeply affected him. He didn't stop talking about this until he became shaheed in June. And by the way, if anyone, this is a picture of Jarnail Bhinderwale by Mohanpal Singh, who was shot several times. And if anyone can find it, and I have a copy of it if you want it, but Bhai Mohanpal Singh actually gives a very detailed account of what happened that day during the Nirangari encounter. On July 30th, 1983, he mentions the police force is set up for protection of the public, but today's police have taken on the form of robbers to loot the public, and there are innumerable examples of this, not 1, 2, or 4. So basically, he made the claim that Sikhs are slaves in India, which was very true, and he cites many things, one of which was that the government has to accept the Anandpur Sahib resolution. He talked about preserving the Punjabi-speaking state, declaring Amritsar as a holy city, naming a train after Harmandir Sahib, installing a transmitter in Amritsar, which the government refused to do. And he said it's very important that we install this transmitter so that people abroad can listen to Kirtan from the Varsab. He opposed putting limits on the Qurban, which had become a law, and he was also opposing unfair property rights between Hindus and Sikhs, and I won't go into too much detail there. Just to mention some of the things that had happened, gun licenses of many Sikhs were canceled. Basically, Bhinderwale and his men, all the guns that they owned and walked around with, they were actually legally purchased firearms. And when the government canceled their licenses, they became outlaws automatically, of course. And basically he said this over and over. He said these aren't things that we did illegally, the government did this to us. He's like, they're the ones who canceled our license on our firearms. And he often used this as an example of why he's not a Congressite, was that members of Congress all have their firearm licenses, why don't I? Sikhs were often wrongfully discharged from government services. Military officers who were Sikhs were often harassed and killed. There was one incident of Seetal Singh, who was an army officer accused of stealing a gun. And what they did, the other officers, including senior officers, they basically cut his limbs, and poured chili peppers in there. They put chili peppers in his eyes, shoved them down his throat, and put them in his rectum as well. They also made him, they shoved dog manure into his mouth, and they killed him eventually. The gun was found, it was misplaced or had fallen into a drain, a sewer, and he had been blamed and killed, and not a single person had been held accountable for this. And Bhinderwale often used this example of why Sikhs were slaves in India. There were many Sikhs who had been jailed, tortured, lots of fake police encounters that we all know about or have heard about, lots of brutality against Sikh women during that time. We're talking about the early 80s here. He gives one example that he talks about a lot, that a woman in the Gale Court police station was forced to have sexual contact with her father. Another occurred in April of 1983 where an 11-year-old girl, Sikh girl, was raped by 3 police officers. And there were numerous examples. Bhinderwale gives hundreds of examples of why Sikhs were slaves in India, a human rights violation. When you read his speeches, There's so many examples, so these are just a couple. Another couple examples that he gives is that when Bhai Gurmat Singh had hijacked an Air India flight in 1982, he had actually been protesting the treatment of Sikhs who had been jailed and tortured, and this happened right after Bhai Jarnail Singh had actually been put in jail for a short while. That this Gurmat Singh who had hijacked this plane, he was basically tortured and kept in jail for 2.5 years, and he emerged as a cripple. And then there was another hijacking by Mohanpal Singh, his real name was Majid Singh, in 1982 later on, who had actually surrendered when the plane had landed, but he was shot and killed by police forces at that time at the airport. And so he cites those examples of what happens to Sikhs when they hijack a plane. He didn't say that he promoted hijacking a plane or that he agreed with what they had done, but he said this is what happens to Sikhs when they hijack a plane. And then he always gave the example of what happens to Hindus when they hijack a plane. Pandey and Bholanath in 1978, in response to Indira Gandhi being put in jail under criminal charges, they had hijacked a plane, and later on, when Indira Gandhi came back in power, they were actually given parliamentary seats in Uttar Pradesh. So he always cited that the people who support the daughter of Brahman are treated this way, but Sikhs are treated much differently. And then there was some mention earlier about the Asian Games that were held in New Delhi in November 1982. Sikhs were actually banned from coming to the Games because it was said that they were going to peacefully protest. And there was actually a family who had come from America to attend the Asian Games, and they were turned around. They weren't allowed to go through customs at that time. They were turned around and forced to come back. So this is another example of why he says Sikhs weren't even allowed in New Delhi at that time. Very few who were more prominent were allowed to attend the Asian Games. He gives some examples. I'll just skip over these quickly. Basically, these were prominent people or government officials who made statements against the Sikhs. Swami Vidyadhar said all Sikhs should go to Punjab. He's from Haryana. Gelo Krishnan, who was a former finance minister, said openly that all Sikh organizations will be destroyed. Harbans Lal Khanna, who was the president of the BJP, the Amritsar branch, actually said, we are not going to let any second or third group exist. We are not going to let a turban remain on any head. The Kachara, the Gara, the Kirpan sent these to Pakistan. So these were there was open sentiment against the Sikh community. He wasn't talking about Bhinderwale or his men. He was talking about Sikhs. People were talking about getting Sikhs out of the area. So what did Bhai Jarnail Singh do? He basically said, our justice system has failed. There are no rights for Sikhs in India. We are slaves. So he told people to arm yourselves. Every village should have Singhs with 3 Sikhs with all carrying pistols and a motorcycle. He says, stand up against injustice and oppression. Stop anyone who dishonors women or who dishonors the Guru Granth Sahib. Basically what he said by stop them is, if you see this happening in front of you, it's your duty as a Sikh to give up your life if you have to stop it. He basically said, stop that person, kill them if you have to. He did say that. Kill them if you have to, but don't come to me later saying this happened and that happened and please protect me. He's like, it's your right, your duty as a Sikh to stop that as it happens. And this was in response to beards of Guru Granth Sahib that were burned in Haryana. I humbly say to you that whoever insults the Guru Granth Sahib should be beheaded instantly at the site of the crime. I say this with a full sense of responsibility. Whoever beheads the murderer of Guru Granth Sahib and comes to me, I shall take care of him. I shall fight any legal case brought against him. So he said this quite openly. You behead them, you kill them, you stop them right there if they're disrespecting their Guru, and I will protect you. So he kind of became a godfather of sorts in that sense, because people did come to him when they were in trouble, but he didn't protect people who had broken the law or who had done bad things. But people did sometimes come to him and say, hey, we're being harassed, can you help us out? So all of you should stay united. Don't be unfair to anyone. Don't let anyone dishonor you. Give up alcohol, give up intoxicants, keep your hair and beard uncut, receive Amrit, pray for the well-being of the Band, and keep the best weapon. If anyone comes to dishonor you, put them on the train of death and pray to the Guru. He admitted openly to the beheading of Chinda, who had still killed Surinder Singh Sordil on Mujibpur. He admitted that his men had beheaded Chinda. He also publicly announced that Bhajan Lal, the Chief Minister of Haryana, who was responsible for not only burning 24 swarups of Guru Granth Sahib, but putting manure on top of Guru Granth Sahib's biers, to taking 125 Sikh men, shaving their faces and shaving their hair, and sending the hair to Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, to burning property and vehicles that belong to Sikhs, to raping women, insulting them, having Sikh women stripped in the middle of the street, and forcing them to dance while the police sat there and beat drums for them to dance. So all these things were done under the rule of Bhajan Lal in Haryana. And so Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, in response to all that, openly said that this man should be killed. So did he take the law into his own hands? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. He took the law into his own hands. But understand, this was an environment where the justice system had completely failed. And Sikhs were treated as second-class citizens or slaves in India. So was he a terrorist? Does that make him a terrorist? Well, the definition of terrorism is the systematic use of violence and intimidation in pursuit of political aims. And then a terrorist is someone who does those things. So Indira Gandhi certainly referred to Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale as a terrorist. She says a group of fanatics and terrorists whose instruments for achieving whatsoever they may have in view are murder, arson, and loot. But Bhai Jarnail Singh's response and his actions were always that I have challenged her, because he was often accused of keeping hit lists. And basically what he's saying here is, he said, I've never had a hit list. Show me the paper and the pen that I purchased to produce these hit lists. I've never produced a hit list. Where are you getting this information from? He goes on to say, we do not go to anyone's home, we do not loot anyone's shop, nor do we lay siege to any place. However, if someone intoxicated by his power as a ruler attacks our home, we are not sitting here wearing bangles that we should continue to suffer as eunuchs and a lifeless people. A eunuch is a man who has been castrated. And basically he's saying, if you think that we're not man enough to step up to this fight, don't think that, because we are. Being armed, there is no greater sin than for a Sikh than attacking an unarmed person, killing an innocent person, looting a shop, harming the innocent, or wishing to insult anyone's daughter or sister. Also being armed, there is no sin greater than not seeking justice. This is October 1983. It's very clear from his words. He never promoted that anyone go out and kill anybody for no reason, they hurt an innocent person or an unarmed person. He always said that our purpose is to stand up for our rights, not to terrorize people. If anyone robs a shop, sets anyone clothes on fire, commits a robbery, makes sexual overtures, and molests any daughter or sister, I can get a hold of him, and I shall thrash him myself, even if he is the son of six. This is what Bhinderwale's message was. He basically goes on to say, no matter who is killed, they say Bhinderwale does it. He says he was in jail when someone was killed in Taran Taran, and he was blamed for it. Then he goes on to say, if anyone's dog or cat dies, basically the news will say that Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale did it. This was the environment that he was trying to keep his good name in. A senior officer in Chandigarh actually stated in December of 1983, 7 months before the attack, said, it's really shocking. This was, by the way, this was in India Today, published in India Today. It's really shocking that we have so little against him while we keep blaming him for all sorts of things. I just want to talk briefly about what happened in Chandokalam. Lala Jagnarayan, who we heard about in the video interview before coming here, he was an Arya Swadhyast, he was an editor for a newspaper, did not like Bhinderwale, was often supportive of the Nirnkad, he's very condescending towards Sikhs, and basically he was shot. And 2 days later, a warrant is issued for Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale's arrest. 2 days after that, the police go to Chandokalam, and they raid the village there. That's a village in India. Bhinderwale was said to have been there. They raided that village. They killed 26 in a massacre. They basically went in firing indiscriminately. The police commissioner was actually quoted as saying that he wanted bloodshed. He wanted blood for the death of Lala Jarnail. The police went in, guns blazing. They burned 2 buses that contained Girsabs of Gurmat, and this had a very profound effect on Bhinderwale. He was very hurt by this. He basically, he said over and over that they murdered our Guru, they burned our Ish, our beloved. Now the thing is, Bhinderwale actually wasn't there at the time. He had left and gone about 5 hours north to Ittachong, which was the basically where the Damdami Taksal was headquartered at that time. And so he wasn't there when the police invaded Chandokalam. And but when he finds out about a week later, he turns himself in. At that time, there was further violence, and 18 more Sikhs were killed at the hands of the police. But he turned himself in. He surrendered to the police at that time. Spent about 25 days in jail. They had no evidence that he had done anything, that he had openly said anything about killing Lala Jarnail. And it's also said that Gandhi Zal Singh stood in parliament and said that they have no evidence that Bhai Jarnail Singh had done anything. And so after 25 days in jail, in 1981, he was released. Later, in December 1983, it said that when he was removed from Guru Nanak Niwas by the Babur Khalsa, that at that time, him and 56 actually went to the district magistrate's house, but he was not arrested at that time, and then he moved into a Kalpakatsad. This was written by Rabir Singh Sandhu, who was also translated his speeches. So there was opportunity for the police to arrest Bhinderwale, to keep him. If he was a terrorist, why didn't they arrest him? Why didn't they keep him? So was he a terrorist? Not by any standard that we can establish. Bhinderwale survived the attack on the Barsad. That's a claim that's been made quite often. I'll go quickly. Gani Thakur Singh of the Damdami Taksal often said that Bhinderwale survived the attack on the Barsad, and that he was alive and well, and that he would come back and continue the Dharm Yodh Morcha. A government doctor actually said that he saw Bhinderwale captured alive, and that he was later tortured to death. And then a correspondent from Surya magazine actually said that they saw a photograph of Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale in custody after June 6, 84. But these were the pictures that were circulated of his body at the time after June 6. It certainly looks like him. But his brother, Bhai Jarnail Singh's brother, was actually brought in to identify the body, and he positively identified it as Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale. And the general who was in charge of invading the Darbar complex, General Kuldeep Bragg, actually also has always said that Bhai Jarnail Singh was killed on June 6th. So did he survive? There's no evidence to say that Bhai Jarnail Singh survived the attack on Darbar Sahib. That's a false claim. So I just want to wrap up here. Did the Indian Army enter the Barsad complex to flush out Bhinderwale? Well, if you look at what Joyce Pettigrew wrote in 1995, she's the author of The Sikhs of the Punjab. She says the army went into the Barsad not to eliminate a political figure or a political movement, but to suppress the culture of the people, to attack their heart, to strike a blow at their spirit and self-confidence. Nothing to do with getting an individual out of the Bagalta. Bhai Jarnail Singh actually said, Guru sings, I shall humbly say this much to the entire congregation and to those who are gathered outside, that when you go to your villages, alert everyone that no Singh in any village should hold back on the day that some greedy person seeking to hold on to his position in government by force of arms forces his way into the boundary of Mohanpal Singh in order to destroy the Sikh nation. He said, don't hold back. He knew the attack was coming. He knew it was coming. He said it over and over. And if we look at when did he say this, he said this in May of 1983. This was 13 months prior to the attack on Darbar Sahib. He knew that the Indian Army would be coming in at some point because it had nothing to do with him personally. It had to do with attacking the Sikhs as a nation. So I'll let you just think about this. I'm not going to comment on whether it's true or not, but let you answer it for yourself. Do some more research. Find your own understanding. So all these myths and legends that we've talked about here, I'm not going to go into those. And I'll just end with whatever you may think about Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale. I hope that I've shed a little bit of light on what he thought, or at least what he said in public. We don't know what he may have said in the privacy of private conversations. But what he said in public, what he promoted was Sikhi and Gurmat Prachar. He never promoted terrorism. He never demanded Khalistan. So I hope you've got an appreciation for that. And I would urge you, as what the previous speaker did, to do your own research. Don't accept things you read on the internet. Don't go to chat rooms to learn about Sikh history. You got to read books. You got to read sources that are confirmed, have undergone academic scrutiny. So please do your own research, but just understand with Bhai Jarnail Singh Bhinderwale, whether you agree with him or not on certain issues, he did inspire tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, Sikhs worldwide to follow the path of the Guru and come closer to the Guru. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.